The massive crystalline ship drifted silently through the void between stars, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly light that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat of its draconic crew. Commander Zephyros stood at the observation deck, his serpentine neck arched gracefully as he gazed at the blue-green world spinning slowly below. His scales shimmered from deep emerald to brilliant gold, a sign of his ancient lineage among the Dracmori Empire. The Dracmori had ruled this sector of space for over 10,000 Earth years. They were beings of immense power and wisdom, their dragon-like forms inspiring both awe and terror across countless civilizations. Each Dracmori possessed natural abilities that seemed like magic to lesser species: telepathy, energy manipulation, and lifespans that stretched across millennia. They considered themselves the rightful guardians of the galaxy, bringing order to chaos wherever they found it. "Commander!" came a voice from behind him. Zephyros turned to see Lieutenant Korath approaching, his younger scales still bearing the copper hues of adolescence. "The human vessel has been secured. We found contraband weapons and illegal mining equipment, just as the intelligence report suggested." Zephyros nodded slowly. Humans had been causing trouble in this sector for months now, their primitive ships sneaking past Dracmori patrols to strip mine asteroids and planets without proper authorization. The Empire had clear laws about resource extraction, laws that these mammals seemed incapable of understanding or respecting. "And the crew?" Zephyros asked, his mental voice carrying the weight of authority that came with 500 years of command experience. "Secured in the detention bay. There's something unusual about one of them, though." Korath's mind voice carried a note of uncertainty. "A young female. She doesn't seem to be part of the mining operation. The other humans appear to be using her for entertainment purposes." The commander's eyes flashed with interest. Slavery was forbidden throughout the Empire, regardless of species. Even humans, despite their chaotic nature, deserved basic protections under Dracmori law. "Show me," Zephyros commanded. They moved through the ship's corridors, their clawed feet making soft clicking sounds against the smooth crystal floor. The detention bay was located in the ship's lower levels, behind force fields that could contain even the most determined escape attempts. As they approached, Zephyros could hear sounds that made his ancient blood run cold. Through the transparent walls of the holding cells, he observed the human crew. 5 males clustered around a 6th cell, their faces twisted with cruel amusement. Inside that cell, huddled in the corner, was a young human female. She couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old, her dark hair matted and her clothing torn. The male humans were throwing small objects at her while making loud, mocking sounds. "How long has this been going on?" Zephyros asked, his mental voice tight with controlled anger. "Since we brought them aboard 3 hours ago. The males keep requesting access to the female's cell. They claim she's their property, and that they have the right to continue what they were doing on their ship." Zephyros studied the scene more carefully. The young female wasn't crying or begging for mercy as he might have expected. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond her tormentors. There was something in her posture, a kind of quiet strength that reminded him of steel being tempered in fire. "What is her status aboard their vessel?" he inquired. Korath consulted his datapad. "According to their ship's records, she was purchased as an indentured servant 6 months ago. However, the other crew members' behavior suggests her actual role was different." The commander's tail lashed once, a sure sign of his growing displeasure. In all his centuries of service, he had encountered many forms of cruelty, but there was something particularly vile about the way these humans treated one of their own kind. "Separate them immediately. Place the female in isolation, but ensure she has proper food and medical attention. The males can remain where they are until we reach the nearest Imperial station. Sir, they're demanding to speak with you directly. They claim we're violating some kind of human law by separating them from their property. Zephyros turned away from the detention bay, his decision made. Inform them that they are now under Imperial jurisdiction. Human law has no authority here. As they walked back toward the command deck, Korath ventured another question. What should we do with the female? Standard protocol would be to return her to human space along with the others. The commander paused in his stride. Something about the young female's demeanor had struck him as unusual. Most beings, when faced with the overwhelming presence of the Drachmori, either cowered in terror or attempted to bargain for their lives. But she had shown neither fear nor servility. Even while being tormented by her own kind, she had maintained a dignity that spoke of inner strength. I want to observe her for a while longer, Zephyros decided. There may be more to this situation than appears on the surface. Hours passed as the ship continued its journey through hyperspace. Zephyros found himself returning to the detention level repeatedly, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't fully explain. The human female had been moved to a more comfortable cell, equipped with proper bedding and a food dispenser. She had eaten sparingly, and then returned to her position in the corner, still maintaining that same distant stare. She hasn't spoken a single word since coming aboard, reported the detention officer, a middle-aged Drachmori named Vex. Medical scans show signs of prolonged malnutrition and recent physical trauma, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Zephyros watched as the young woman slowly stood and walked to the small window in her cell. Outside, the swirling colors of hyperspace painted her face in shifting hues of blue and violet. For the first time since her arrival, she showed a flicker of emotion. Not fear or despair, but something that looked almost like wonder. Has she requested anything? He asked. Only water. She drinks constantly, as if she's been dehydrated for weeks. The commander made a mental note to investigate the conditions aboard the human vessel more thoroughly. If these males had been withholding basic necessities from their captive, they would face additional charges under Imperial law. As the ship's chronometer marked the end of the duty cycle, Zephyros retired to his quarters but found sleep elusive. Images of the young human's eyes kept returning to his mind. He had seen that look before, long ago, in the gaze of a fellow Drachmori who had survived a particularly brutal interrogation by enemy forces. It was the look of someone who had endured unimaginable suffering, but refused to be broken by it. The next morning brought a disturbing report from the detention bay. The human males had spent the night shouting and banging against their cell walls, demanding access to their property and threatening various forms of retaliation against the Drachmori crew. Their behavior had become increasingly erratic and violent. They're claiming that the female possesses information vital to Imperial security, Vex reported. They say they were in the process of extracting this information when we captured them. Zephyros felt a cold anger settle in his stomach. And what does the female say about these claims? She still hasn't spoken, sir. But when the males started shouting about her supposed information, she looked different, alert, almost like she was listening for something specific. The commander decided it was time for a direct conversation. He made his way to the detention level, but instead of observing from outside, he entered the young woman's cell personally. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time, their eyes met directly. What he saw there stopped him cold. Intelligence burned in those dark human eyes, intelligence mixed with calculation and something that looked very much like patience. This was not the broken victim he had expected to find. "You understand more than you're letting on," he said aloud, choosing spoken words instead of mental communication to avoid overwhelming her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse but steady as stone, She spoke her first words since coming aboard. Commander Zephyros of the 32nd Imperial Fleet. Ship designation Crystal Talon. Current heading, Imperial Station Korath 7. She paused, tilting her head slightly. You're wondering how I know these things? The ancient dragon felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine surprise. Indeed I am. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, and suddenly she looked far older than her apparent years. Those men think they captured a helpless slave girl. You think you rescued a victim. Both of you are wrong. Before Zephyros could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. His communication device crackled to life with urgent reports from the bridge. Commander, we're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching our position. Configuration unknown, but they're large. Very large. The young woman's smile widened. Right on schedule, she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. Commander Zephyros stared at the human female with newfound wariness as the ship's alarms continued their urgent wailing. The coincidence of unknown vessels appearing just as she revealed her deception was far too convenient to ignore. "Who are you?" he demanded, his massive form towering over her small frame. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her torn clothing with movements that suddenly seemed far more graceful than before. "My name is Elena Vasquez, and I'm a lieutenant commander in the Earth Defense Force Intelligence Division. Those men you've been holding, they have no idea who I really am." The communication device on Zephyros's wrist crackled again. "Commander, the unknown vessels are human in design, but they're massive. The largest one appears to be over 3 kilometers long. They're requesting immediate communication with you personally." Elena's smile never wavered. "You should probably take that call, Commander. They tend to get impatient when kept waiting." Zephyros felt a chill run down his serpentine spine. Human vessels were supposed to be primitive affairs, barely capable of interstellar travel. The largest ship in their fleet was rumored to be less than 800 meters in length. Something that big suggested technological capabilities the Drakmori Empire had never encountered from this species. "Bridge, put the transmission through to my location," he ordered. A holographic projection materialized in the center of the cell, showing a human male in an immaculate military uniform. His hair was silver gray, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a seasoned warrior. Behind him, Zephyros could see what appeared to be a command deck filled with sophisticated equipment and dozens of human crew members. "Commander Zephyros," the human said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the space around them. "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Force. I believe you have one of my officers aboard your vessel." "Admiral," Zephyros replied carefully. "We rescued a human female from what appeared to be a slavery situation aboard a mining vessel. If she is indeed one of your people—" "Oh, she's one of mine, all right," Chen interrupted, his gaze shifting to Elena. "Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, status report." Elena straightened into a perfect military posture. "Mission accomplished, sir. The target vessel has been secured, and I've successfully gathered intelligence on Drakmori detention procedures, ship layout, and command protocols." The ancient dragon's eyes narrowed as the implications became clear. "You were never a victim. This was all planned." 6 months of deep cover, Elena confirmed. Those miners thought they were getting a helpless slave girl they could abuse for entertainment. Instead, they got a trained intelligence operative who's been systematically gathering data on illegal human operations in Drakmori space. Admiral Chen's image leaned forward slightly. "Commander, I apologize for the deception, but we had to understand how your people would react to finding humans in distress. The results have been illuminating." Zephyros felt his ancient pride sting at being so thoroughly manipulated. "You used your own officer as bait. You allowed her to endure abuse for months just to spy on us. Elena's expression hardened. Those men deserved far worse than what they got, and everyone they hurt deserved justice. But more importantly, we needed to know if the Drakmori Empire was as honorable as your propaganda claims. And your conclusion? Zephyros asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. You separated me from my captors within hours of discovery, Elena replied. You ensured I had food, medical attention, and safe quarters. You followed your own laws regarding the treatment of prisoners, even when those prisoners were supposedly worthless humans. She paused, studying his face. You showed mercy and honor. That tells us everything we needed to know. Admiral Chen's projection stepped closer. Commander, we've been watching your empire's expansion for decades. Every species you've encountered has either been conquered, eliminated, or reduced to vassalage. We expected the same fate for humanity. Your people have been violating imperial law, Zephyros pointed out. Illegal mining, trespassing in restricted space zones, refusing to acknowledge imperial authority. Because we were testing your responses, Chen replied bluntly. We needed to understand your capabilities, your methods, your weaknesses. What we discovered is that you're powerful, yes, but also bound by codes of honor that can be predicted and leveraged. The Dragon Commander felt a growing unease as he realized the true scope of what he was hearing. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a demonstration of power. The humans had orchestrated everything from the beginning, manipulating events to gather intelligence while simultaneously revealing their own hidden capabilities. How many ships do you have out there? He asked. Today? 12 dreadnoughts, 36 heavy cruisers, and about 100 smaller vessels, Chen answered casually. Tomorrow? Well, that depends on how this conversation goes. Elena moved to stand beside the holographic projection of her admiral. Commander, you've been operating under the assumption that humans are a primitive species barely capable of space travel. That assumption has been carefully cultivated and maintained for the past 50 years. Impossible, Zephyros protested. Our scouts have observed your worlds. Your technology is centuries behind ours. The technology you've been allowed to see, Elena corrected. What your scouts observed were our outer colonies, deliberately kept at lower technological levels. Our true capabilities have been hidden in systems you've never suspected existed. Admiral Chen gestured, and the holographic display expanded to show a tactical readout of the surrounding space. Zephyros's blood ran cold as he saw the true scope of the human fleet arrayed around his ship. Vessels of designs he'd never encountered, equipped with weapons systems that defied his understanding of human capabilities. While your empire was building crystal palaces and perfecting telepathic communication, Chen continued, humanity was developing technologies you never imagined. Quantum computing, nanoscale manufacturing, artificial intelligence systems that make your best strategists look like children playing with toys. Elena pulled a small device from her pocket, something that should have been detected and confiscated by the ship's security systems. This contains terabytes of data on your ship's design, your crew's psychological profiles, your communication protocols, and your defensive capabilities. Information that's already been transmitted to our fleet. How? Zephyros demanded. Our security systems are impenetrable. To conventional technology, yes, Elena agreed. But quantum-entangled data streams operating on frequencies your sensors can't detect. That's child's play for us. The Dragon Commander realized he was facing a paradigm shift that shook the very foundations of his worldview. The Drakmori Empire had built its power on the assumption of technological and mental superiority over all other species. If humans had been hiding capabilities that rivaled or exceeded their own. What do you want? He asked quietly. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. Respect, Commander. Recognition as equals, rather than primitives to be managed or conquered. For 50 years, we've been content to let you believe in your superiority while we prepared for the day when that delusion would become unsustainable. Elena stepped forward. You showed honor in your treatment of me, even when you believed I was helpless. That gives us hope that coexistence might be possible. But make no mistake, Chen added, his voice hardening again. Humanity will no longer tolerate being treated as a lesser species. We've demonstrated that we can infiltrate your ships, predict your responses, and match your technological capabilities. The question now is whether the Drakmori Empire is wise enough to adapt to this new reality. Alarms suddenly rang out from a different section of the ship. Zephyros's wrist communicator activated automatically. Commander, the human prisoners in Detention Bay 7 have somehow escaped their cells. They've barricaded themselves in the armory and are threatening to detonate the ship's power core unless their demands are met. Elena's face went pale. Those weren't part of the plan. Those men are genuinely dangerous, and if they get access to your weapons... Admiral Chen's projection flickered with urgency. Commander, we need to work together on this. Those miners represent everything worst about certain human factions. They're exactly the kind of people both our civilizations need to stand against. Zephyros felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. In the span of minutes, his understanding of humanity, his empire, and his place in the galaxy had been completely overturned. Now he faced a choice that would define not just his own fate, but potentially the future relationship between two powerful civilizations. The escaped prisoners were shouting over the ship's communication system, demanding the return of their property, and threatening increasingly violent consequences if their demands weren't met. Their voices carried the ugly edge of desperation and unhinged hatred that Zephyros had learned to recognize in truly dangerous individuals. Elena was already moving toward the cell's exit. I can help you stop them, but you'll have to trust me with access to your ship's systems. Why would you help us? Zephyros asked. She paused at the doorway, her eyes meeting his one final time. Because some things matter more than politics or species loyalty. Those men are monsters, and monsters don't deserve to win, no matter what flag they're flying under. The corridor outside Elena's cell erupted in controlled chaos as Zephyros made his decision. Computer, grant temporary tactical access to the human female, authorization Zephyros 77 Alpha. Elena's eyes flashed with surprise, and something that might have been respect. Thank you, Commander. I won't betray that trust. They moved swiftly through the ship's crystalline passages. The dragon's massive frame surprisingly graceful as he kept pace with the smaller human. Behind them, Admiral Chen's holographic projection flickered and stabilized, maintaining the connection as they ran. Status report, Elena called out as they approached the main security station. Lieutenant Korath looked up from his console, his young features twisted with confusion and fear. The humans somehow overrode the cell locks using a device they'd hidden in one of their boots. They've barricaded themselves in Armory Section 12 and are threatening to overload the antimatter containment field. Can they actually do that? Zephyros demanded. Elena was already interfacing with the ship's systems through a quantum neural link she'd produced from her torn clothing. Unfortunately, yes. Human mining crews work with high-yield explosives regularly. If they figured out your antimatter storage protocols... She paused, her eyes going wide as data flowed across her consciousness. Commander, they're not just threatening to blow up the ship. They're trying to create a cascade reaction that would destabilize hyperspace in this entire sector. The implications hit Zephyros like a physical blow. A hyperspace cascade could trap dozens of ships in permanent dimensional distortion, killing thousands of beings across multiple species. They're willing to commit genocide just to avoid imperial justice? These aren't rational actors. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the comm system. We've been tracking this particular crew for months. They're part of a radical faction that believes humans should conquer and enslave every other species they encounter. They see the Drakmori Empire as their primary obstacle. Elena's fingers danced across the holographic interface with inhuman speed and precision. I'm reading their biometrics through your security sensors. Elevated stress hormones, neurochemical imbalances consistent with combat stimulants. They've been drugging themselves to maintain aggression and suppress fear responses. Can you stop them? Zephyros asked. Not remotely. Your ship's security protocols are too robust, which is normally a good thing. But I can guide you through a tactical approach that minimizes the risk of cascade failure. The Dragon Commander felt the crushing weight of command decisions settling on his shoulders. He could attempt to retake the armory using his crew's natural advantages, telepathy, energy projection, and physical superiority. But if the humans triggered their explosive device during the assault, the resulting cascade could kill more beings than the Drakmori Empire had lost in the last century of conflicts. "What do you propose?" he asked Elena. "Let me go in alone," she said quietly. "They still think I'm their helpless victim. They won't see me as a threat until it's too late." "Absolutely not." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the tactical discussion. "Lieutenant Commander, you are not authorized to engage in solo assault operations against hostile targets." Elena's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Zephyros of his own species' determination. "With respect, Admiral, I'm the only one small enough to use the ship's maintenance conduits to reach the armory undetected, and I'm the only one here those men will underestimate." Zephyros studied the human female with new eyes. Over the past few hours, she had systematically demolished every assumption he'd held about her species, her capabilities, and her mission. Now she was volunteering to risk her life to save his crew and prevent a catastrophic loss of life across multiple star systems. "What weapons do you need?" he asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the expression reached her eyes. "Commander, I appreciate the offer, but humans learned long ago that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is a clever mind attached to a body that others underestimate." She began removing panels from the security station, revealing a network of conduits barely large enough for her small frame to navigate. "I'll need 15 minutes to reach the armory through the maintenance shafts. When you see the lights in Section 12 flicker 3 times, seal the blast doors and activate emergency containment protocols." "And if you fail?" Zephyros asked. "Then Admiral Chen gets to tell the galaxy that the Drakmori Empire died because they trusted a human," Elena replied with dark humor. "But somehow, I don't think that's going to happen." She disappeared into the maintenance conduit with liquid grace, leaving Zephyros alone with Admiral Chen's holographic projection and the growing sound of the escaped prisoner's threats echoing through the ship's communication system. "Commander," Chen said after a moment of tense silence, "I want you to understand something. Elena volunteered for this mission knowing she might not survive. She's been living with those animals for 6 months, enduring their abuse, waiting for the right moment to gather the intelligence we needed. If she dies stopping them, it won't be because she's reckless. It'll be because she believes some things are worth dying for." Zephyros nodded slowly, his respect for the small human female growing with each passing moment. In his 5 centuries of life, he had encountered many warriors, but few with the kind of quiet courage Elena had displayed. The ship's internal sensors tracked her progress through the maintenance conduits as she made her way toward the armory. Her movements were precise and silent, evidence of training that went far beyond what any primitive species should have possessed. "How long has humanity been preparing for contact with our empire?" Zephyros asked. "Officially, about 30 years, Chen replied. Unofficially, we've been watching you since your first scouts entered our outer territories nearly a century ago. We learned early that the galaxy is a dangerous place for species that appear weak or disorganized." Through the security monitors, Zephyros watched Elena reach a ventilation grate directly above the armory. The escaped miners were visible below, their faces twisted with paranoid rage as they worked frantically to bypass the ship's antimatter containment systems. 2 minutes, Elena's voice whispered through the comm system. They're more unstable than I thought. I count at least 3 different combat stimulants in their bloodstreams, plus signs of prolonged sleep deprivation and malnutrition. They're basically walking chemical weapons at this point. Elena, Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of paternal concern. Remember your training. Fast, clean, and don't give them time to think. Copy that, Admiral. Beginning final approach. Zephyros watched in fascination as Elena quietly removed the ventilation grate and lowered herself into the armory with movements that seemed to defy gravity. The escaped prisoners were so focused on their sabotage work that they never noticed the small figure moving among the weapons racks behind them. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but Zephyros would remember every detail for the rest of his very long life. Elena moved like liquid lightning, striking pressure points and nerve clusters with surgical precision. The first miner collapsed before he even realized she was there. The second spun around just in time to see her fingers dart toward his throat with inhuman speed. The third and largest of the group managed to grab a Drakmori energy weapon, but Elena was already moving. She used the falling body of the second miner as a springboard, launching herself through the air to deliver a strike that dropped the armed man like a stone. In less than half a minute, 3 dangerous criminals lay unconscious on the armory floor, their explosive device safely disconnected and their threat neutralized. Section 12 secure, Elena reported calmly, as if she had just completed routine maintenance rather than prevented a catastrophic disaster. The antimatter containment system is stable, and the prisoners are ready for transport to proper detention facilities. Zephyros stared at the security monitors in stunned silence. He had just witnessed a display of skill and courage that challenged everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. Commander, Admiral Chen said quietly, I hope this demonstration has helped clarify humanity's true position in this galaxy. We're not the primitive species your empire believed us to be. We're not helpless victims waiting to be conquered or guided by superior civilizations. We're equals, with our own strengths, our own technologies, and our own sense of honor. As security teams moved in to secure the unconscious prisoners, Elena emerged from the armory, looking no more disheveled than she had before the confrontation. She walked directly to Zephyros, her dark eyes meeting his ancient gaze with steady confidence. Commander, I believe we were in the middle of a diplomatic discussion when we were interrupted, she said with a slight smile. Shall we continue? Zephyros felt something shift deep in his consciousness, a fundamental reassessment of humanity's place in the cosmic order. These beings were not the chaotic primitives his empire had dismissed them as. They were careful planners, skilled warriors, and honorable allies when treated with proper respect. Yes, he said slowly, I believe we should. But perhaps we should start with the assumption that neither of our species fully understands the other. Elena's smile widened. Now that, Commander, sounds like the beginning of a very interesting conversation. Above them, through the transparent hull of the crystalline ship, the combined fleets of 2 great civilizations hung in space, no longer as predator and prey, but as potential partners in an uncertain but promising future.